America. I'm Hugh. The shutdown is underway. I'll update you on the Schumer shutdown with Senators John Cornyn and Dan Sullivan later in the program. But I'm so pleased to begin today with Leland Vittert. Leland is, of course, the host of On Balance with Leland Vittert over at News Nation. But far more importantly, for the purposes of today, he's the author of this fabulous book, Born Lucky. And Leland, welcome. Congratulations on this. I haven't been this surprised or this moved in a long time than I was by Born Lucky, and I bet I'm not alone in that. Am I?
No, you are not. We have sold out now on Amazon twice. Barnes & Noble still has copies. You can go to Amazon right now and put in your order for Born Lucky. We're getting like 1,000 books a day into Amazon, and 20,000 arrive Wednesday of next week, and then another 30,000 after that. And we've hit this nerve, not because I'm anything special, but I think it's because so many people are reading the book and hearing the story, and it's doing what it meant to do, which is provide hope to every parent who has a struggling kid. You know, it is about my dad raising me when he figured out that I had autism and adapting me to the world, not the world to me. But this idea of hope, and in the words of George Will, who wrote the foreword, the mountain-moving power of parental love is resonating because nobody is willing to talk about that right now, and it's not something the experts spend a lot of time reinforcing.
I think it's an incredibly courageous book because you really laid it out there.
Yep.
Junior high and high school are rough, and college, Northwestern, Medill is rough, and the broadcast business is rough. But mostly, I want to start by, it's 2 books. So you want to be a foreign correspondent. That's a very good book. Anyone who wants to be a foreign correspondent should read it. They'll pass it out at Medill for years. But it's really for a book for every parent with a child with an intellectual disability, every family member of a child with an intellectual disability, every kid with an intellectual disability who can read or have it read to them. And Leland, I got to say, it's also a book for adults who may not be in your family, but may know about kids with an intellectual disability, because I want to run down some names for you. Bert Stepping, Terry Hess, Rick Smith, Stan Mick, Tom Stennert, Skippy Kiefer, Sandra Muller, Rob McClain, John Feldman, Brad Remington. These are all people who were good to you. I mean, you don't name one person who was bad to you, but you tell the story of every person who helped you.
Exactly. And I'm glad you picked up on that, Hugh. It shows your compassion and your understanding of this. This book wasn't about settling scores, okay? I remember the art teacher in 8th grade who didn't think I was going to become Picasso and said in front of the entire class, if my dog was as ugly as you, Vittert, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards. I remember his name. I didn't use it in the book because it wasn't about score settling, number one. And number two, I wanted to let people know, adults know, just how much being kind to a kid who's having a hard time, as clearly I did, does. It's extraordinary. Obviously, this is so important for every parent to read. I think you make a great point. The second point, though, is it is so important for the message to get out of what cruelty can do to kids. And then, as you point out, the more important message, what kindness can do.
Well, you know what? I cannot believe the English teacher. I cannot believe the choral teacher. I actually got angry at the choral teacher. And I don't, normally don't read books with emotion, but I'm following your way along here. And believe me, we can go toe to toe on uncoordinated, but I was the kid who was always talking, but not like you. Your dad tapping his watch. Would you tell that story? Because I think that's a fabulous story.
Yeah, look, Dad's mission from when I was 5 years old was to figure out how to adapt me to the world. And I had a lot of various classic symptoms of autism. We'll go through at some point the moment I was diagnosed and how helpless and hopeless he felt he was. But he realized that I didn't understand the world the way the world worked, socially, emotionally, in social interaction. So I'll give you an example, Hugh. I only had Dad, right? I had no friends my own age, so I spent countless hours with him. He decided that he would be my friend. And so I started talking about the news and politics and business very young. And let's just say we were going out to lunch with Mr. Hewitt, which was always the best thing in the world to do, because I loved being with adults, because some of them, as you would have been, would be nice to me. And I would just start in before we would even sit down with question after question after question. How do you book your guests? What do you read? Who writes your questions for you? How do you know how long to talk with each guest? How do you know what your commercials are going to be? I would just pound someone endlessly. Relentless was a nickname. And it would be very easy for a father to be like, okay, be quiet. My dad knew that would A, embarrass me, and B, wouldn't help me. So he developed this method where he would tap his watch. And that meant it was time for me to be quiet. And then in Born Lucky, we take you through, yes, I was quiet, but nobody knew why I suddenly stopped talking. I did. But this was a message from my dad to be quiet, but also to bookmark that moment. And then he and I would post game, almost like watching game film in a football game of, okay, so when Mr. Hewitt was talking about what his kids were doing now in their lives and his grandkids, why did you want to talk about the government shutdown? I don't know, Dad. I thought it was interesting. Well, yeah, but what do you think Mr. Hewitt was thinking at that moment? And that was the sort of minute by minute, second by second teaching of the social construct, human interaction, the human condition that Dad did with me for years. And sometimes, I mean, it was 15 years or 16 years that sort of this all lasted. And look, and I'll happy to go further, but it's still a work in progress for me. This is still a daily, maybe not hourly, but certainly daily discipline that I have to go through.
But you know, Leland, what amazes me, I've known you for a few years. I've been with you in studio. We've talked on the air before. I had no idea. Zero idea you were on the spectrum, and I usually have a pretty good antenna about that. Zero idea, but you definitely are. And the IQ tests don't lie. The first one you took, there's a 70-point spread between verbal ability and spatial ability, meaning you're the most uncoordinated kid in the world, and you're very, very smart. And it got worse. 8 years later, it had gone up like 72 points. And so your poor parents, there are lots of heroes in this book. Your mom and dad are hero number 1 and 2. Liberty, your sister, PhD from MIT. You talked about the blowback she got at school.
Sure.
I hadn't thought about the siblings of kids with intellectual disabilities. And I want to distinguish physical disabilities. We're not talking about cerebral palsy. We're talking about intellectual disabilities on the spectrum. But your dad's afterwards, people are going to stand in bookstores and read it, right? They're going to go to page 242 and read his 4 bits of advice for the parents of children with intellectual disabilities. And that's all they need to they'll buy the book then. But did you have to get permission from him to write this? Because it really is candid.
It's such a great question, Hugh. And I think you really have to go back to that moment that I was diagnosed, which is they're in one of those little medical office buildings, waiting rooms. My parents and I, they've been told they needed to get Lucky evaluated. And so in Born Lucky, we take you into that room, right? And the woman brings me back after 2 hours of evaluation and says to my parents, we really don't understand what's going on inside his head. He obviously has horrible behavioral issues and social issues with his own, friends his own age. As you pointed out, I had the biggest spread in the IQ testing that they had ever seen, from intellectually retarded on one spectrum to sort of genius on the other, huge learning disabilities. And my dad goes, okay, what do we do? And she goes, nah, I don't know. There's not much. And he goes, is there anything we can do? And she goes, generally not. So he felt completely hopeless. And you're right that he doesn't like being called a hero, and he doesn't want that moniker on him. He can identify as whatever he wants, and the readers can decide after they read the book. But in order to write the book, I said to Dad, and we'd never talked about this with anybody, no teachers, no anybody. And I said to my dad, look, this can help a lot of people. It can give a lot of parents hope. So we're going to write the book. It's going to be as raw and as candid as it can possibly be. And I'm going to interview you, and you have to be totally honest with me. But if, when I turn in the manuscript, before I turn in the manuscript to HarperCollins, you don't like the manuscript, we'll kill it. And Born Lucky won't exist. He said, all right, so write the book. I give him the manuscript, and he was ready to kill it. because he said, this is just too personal. We've never told anyone about you having autism. No one, no teachers, no therapists, no principals, nothing. And you're going to put all of this out there, your darkest, most awful moments. You never had therapy. Now you're going through therapy on national television. I said, I understand. Let me ask you a question, Dad. I said, if rather than that therapist, psychologist at 5 years old, when she diagnosed me, had said, there is some things you can do. I want you to read this book, Born Lucky. What would you have done?
Bingo.
And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, I would have read it every single day.
I'm coming right back with Leland Vittert in hour 3, and again tomorrow, but we'll post the entire interview over at my YouTube channel, and it will get sent around to everyone because everyone's going to read this book. I know, because Ron Fournier had the same thing when he wrote Love That Boy. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. You will have missed maybe Leland Vittert when we began the show with Leland, and then I broke the interview into 2 parts because I needed to cover the shutdown. So he's back at the end of the program, and I'll put the rest online tonight, and we'll play some more tomorrow. His brand new book is Born Lucky. I like broadcast rule number 1 that I broke. I didn't explain the title. It's because Leland's nickname was Lucky, which I didn't know until I read Born Lucky, because he had a near miss at birth and like 1,000 near misses afterwards. There are 2 people I want to make sure I talk about with you, Leland. The first, I don't know if you ever met Terry Hess. Did you ever meet Terry Hess, or did you just hear about him from your dad?
My dad's friend. This is my dad's friend who gave my dad How to Win Friends and Influence People, the great Dale Carnegie book. To be fair, probably, and you see a little bit of this in Born Lucky, that my dad, people would say, was on the spectrum at some point here or there, but not nearly to the extent that I am, and certainly not nearly to the extent that I was before he started working with me. So that was Dad's friend who understood sort of what Dad needed, and Dad tried with the same thing with me. Hey, as I got older, hey, why don't you read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People? I was far too gone, or gone's not the right word. I was too far down or on or away, whatever adjective you want to use, on the spectrum to understand how to put How to Win Friends and Influence People into practice. So that began the coaching process, Hugh, that we just talked about.
Yeah, the 6 years between junior high and high school, I think probably the most important message of the book is they don't define your life. And especially if you're a kid with intellectual disabilities, junior high and high school are horrific. But your dad's friend Terry Hess gave him Dale Carnegie, and he told him, don't tell people you're reading this book. It's like he gave him the cheat code to Dale Carnegie because he knew your dad would go out and tell everyone he was reading this book. But what's amazing is that you have a guy, Rob McLean, who lets you join Theta Chi at Northwestern. Do these guys know they're in the book, by the way? Did you write everyone and tell them they're in the book?
No. Rob knows he's in the book because he and I are still dear friends. And of all things, his wife is in the book publicity business and promotion business. And she's been kind enough to offer a little bit of help on the side here to spread the word of Born Lucky and to show parents that there really is hope. And I would just say one sort of ... to you. It's not just intellectual disabilities. There's so many kids who are getting bullied and pushed around and crushed these days, Hugh. I think this book speaks to them and their parents too.
I think you're right.
About that. And, my dad always used to tell me the characteristics, the qualities, the personality traits, the work ethic that is getting you bullied and pushed around and isolated right now in middle school is what is going to make you successful later in life. The thing he didn't add in that, but is also true, is that having a horrible middle school experience is great training for a Washington newsroom.
And Jerusalem or Egypt during the Arab Spring. There's a lot of journalism in this book because Leland's had a lot of war stories, and I mean literally war stories. But I want to make sure I say on the air today, when you were dating the woman from the other channel in Orlando, not your wife.
Oh, God.
And she gave you the piece of advice. If it even crosses your mind, maybe I shouldn't say that on air, don't say it. That bit of advice is worth the price of the book for anyone who wants to go into broadcast. How many times have you used that?
1,000 times. And, I want to say, and I think this is really important, and one of the questions I've gotten as we've started talking about Born Lucky is, what is it like to date on the autism spectrum? For someone who has autism and always will, as I do. And I said, well, I don't know how to date not on the autism spectrum, because I'm just me. And I now thankfully have a wife who is magnificent, and her EQ, her emotional intelligence, is about the temperature of the sun. So it tells you what it takes to put up with me. But there was a woman I was dating in Orlando who was an anchor, who was older. And I think she understood me to a certain extent. And she said, the way to not get in trouble on TV is not to not say bad things, but that if it even crosses your mind for a third of a second, should I or can I say this? Just don't say it. The answer is instantly and always no. And I think she knew that perhaps there were times I was going to think about things that I probably shouldn't say.
There's also in the book, you describe, there's always that guy or gal in a newsroom who, for whatever reason, hates you. And they just want to destroy your career for whatever reason. And God knows, we don't know what it is, but it's true. I've been in this for 35 years. There's always somebody that hates the other guy in the newsroom. And how you dealt with it being on the spectrum is interesting. But Leland, there weren't girls in your life until the girl that you wanted to date. So you tried to take up tennis until your dad said, I'll pay for every tennis lesson I can. You'll never play tennis. I think your dad must have had an amazing sense of humor, but he was at the bottom of the garage, at the driveway every day at 4:20 in the afternoon.
Yeah, he was. And this issue of trust with my dad was really important. So many kids now, parents of so many kids are told, hey, tell your kid they can do everything, right? Johnny and Sally are going to be great. Everybody gets participation trophies. Nothing there is no standards. There are no winners and losers and on and on. That was not the way it operated in my house. My dad realized that I wasn't going to be good at school. I wasn't going to have friends. I wasn't going to be good at athletics. So he created ways for me to earn self-esteem. Her self-esteem was earned, not given in our house. So 200 push-ups a day, starting when I was 5 days a week. And after 3 months, I would get a reward. I would get to go do something special. And it was to try and create situations outside of my peer group where I could succeed. That was number one. But I think number two, what is interesting that you are getting at is how Dad was always incredibly direct and blunt with me. And the tennis story is a perfect example of that. I really wanted to learn how to play tennis. Dad was a very gifted athlete, great tennis player, great golfer, on and on and on. And in 7th grade, there was a girl I liked, so I tried to pick up tennis to try and take her to play tennis. And I had 3 or 4 tennis lessons, and Dad came to watch the last one. And at the end of the last one, he looked at me, he said, I have to be honest with you. You are never going to be able to play tennis. You're uncoordinated. You have no hand-eye coordination. You can't really run very fast. You're never going to be able to play tennis. Now, I'll take you as many tennis lessons as you want. I'll come watch your games, but you need to know you will always be terrible. Which some would say was cruel or harsh parenting. It was great because it set me free from ever wanting to try to play tennis. I'd move on to other things. But more importantly, it meant that when my dad told me I could do something, that I knew he was telling me the truth. And that issue of always telling the truth was so important, and always being there. You said at the bottom of the driveway.
And it was in your grandfather's dry goods store. I love the emphasis on truth telling. The one time you didn't tell the truth to the Costco salesman about you got out of it. You talked your way out of it. People have to read the book, but it did come back to bite you almost in the rear end. I want to talk about a couple of people. Stan Mick. Because flying and rowing, I did not expect to find in Born Lucky. Stan Mick is a hero. He's dead now, but this is the message to people who don't have a child or a family relative with intellectual disability, but who might come across them. You can be the most important person in a kid's life and have no idea. Although Mr. Mick must have figured it out, right?
He did.
He knew he was important to you.
Mr. Mick was my flight instructor, and when I was a little boy, I wanted to fly. My dad hated airplanes, on and on and on. And I think he realized that it was a way to give me self-esteem and give me a way to accomplish things and have something outside of my peer group that could be special and could be big to me. It's no different than kids who play travel baseball or whatever. It's the same kind of concept. It just wasn't sports for me. So I started to learn to fly. Mr. Mick was older at the time. I bet he was probably 65 when we started flying together. And magnificent man, very different than my father, very quiet, engineering type. But it required me to learn all sorts of things, right? It required me the discipline of studying every night for my tests. It required the discipline of not quitting and the power of not quitting. I also got airsick. So in Born Lucky, you're in the plane with us, and I'm throwing up all over
three
this tiny
times
little
in
plane.
the book.
Oh yeah, that's this tiny little plane. It's like a sewing machine. But my dad says to Mr. Mick at some point, why don't you just tell him he can't do this? I really wanted to have this achievement of flying across the Atlantic Ocean. And he said, just tell him he can't do it. Like the vomiting and the difficulties and everything else. And Stan looked at my dad and said, if he won't quit, I can't. And boy, what a powerful message that is.
That is an amazing message. If he won't quit, I won't. If he can't quit, I won't. I also want to talk to you about Fudgies, Perma Fudgies, and your helper, Don Yeager. Because
yes,
Yeager must have had an ear for story. You must have spent a lot of time with him, Sports Illustrated, famous writer. And he must have been, did he register disbelief when, for example, Do You Sing Without Naked, the story on Lake Geneva, or the Perma Fudgy story? You have a memory for all these details. Was he amazed?
Well, look, Don and I have become dear, dear friends. This is my co-author. And the way this project started, Hugh, is that I had written about 700 words about Dad. And really just for myself, and kept them to myself. And I thought maybe sometime I'd try to do an op-ed about Father's Day or something, but I had never told anyone that I was on the autism spectrum. Nobody. And I was talking to somebody who I worked with who was trying to help me on TV, the coaching of actually the TV performance. And I said, I've never told anybody this, and I don't ever want to use something as an excuse, but when you're talking about reading emotions, you should know I'm autistic. And it's very hard for me. And the person was blown away, just said, I can't believe this, on and on. And she said, have you ever told anybody? I said, no. And I sent her those 700 words. And those 700 words made their way to Don Yeager, who is the father of an autistic child. Oh. And he called me and he said, I have to tell this story. And I didn't want a co-writer. I wanted to do, if I was going to write a book, do it myself, on and on. And he is the most magnificent man. And as you point out, the most magnificent storyteller. And you know what, Hugh? He asked questions and forced parts of this story out of me and frankly out of my dad and mom that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And it's been just a remarkable relationship that we have built together. And you're right, unbelievably fantastic writer. And we sort of did it where he wrote the first half of the book and I edited it out of the stories that we all came together with. But because it was my mom and dad, I thought that would be helpful for him to have more of a voice in. And then the later chapters that were really my stories, I was much more involved in writing, and then he edited them.
Yeah, that's professional. That's actually, I did this job. I went from, where did you start? Little Rock to Orlando to Denver.
The last, and there's a lot of emotion in, there's meeting Rachel, there's being invited to leave Fox News. There's the inner workings of a DC cable news newsroom, which I think your listeners will find that part of Born Lucky interesting. But that was more of the story I thought that I could kind of tell more exactly.
But I also want to encourage everyone who's listening. Leland and I can't spell. And I share this with you, Leland. I can't spell. And so when you wrote in your book, I still can't spell, I said, gosh, there are two of us in the business. I'm so happy about that. I do want to, before we wrap this up, I got to tell you about the one thing I think you're wrong about. You pronounce sort of last rites over talk radio. And you got your start in talk radio in St. Louis at the big guy, Charlie Brennan, and big name in the business in the old days. I still think it's going to matter when elections are close and when just a slight nudge matters. You got into it in the year 2000. So I don't think it's going to be dead, and we move a lot of books. But I do think you understand talk radio and the importance of talking to people. And I think, is that why On Balance is working so well?
It's a great question. On Balance is the show I do 9 p.m. on News Nation. We used to be fortunate enough to have Hugh as a guest. He has now rightfully been signed exclusively with another network. It was one of our favorite and highest rated guest segments whenever you would come on, Hugh. But I think what is working about News Nation is that there is a thirst for real journalism, and by that I mean giving both sides a hard time equally, but also people have underestimated how radical the center is in America. I'm a journalist. I'm an old-fashioned referee. I call the game. Then I always say that there's a difference between, listening to a baseball game between the Yankees and the Red Sox. There's the Yankees broadcast, the Red Sox broadcast, and then there's the national broadcast. You listen to the national broadcast, it's pretty much just here's what's happening. And that's kind of how on balance and how we do things at News Nation. I don't think talk radio is dead. I think in what you're doing, Hugh, online and being able to be on radio and then on YouTube and on podcasts and everything else, people always are going to want to hear really smart folks like yourself have these conversations. The difference, I think, with what I do, it just is we're not partisan about it. We don't pick sides in the fight. And we're different because we'll actually tell you what we think. And then we'll have people on to challenge us, which none of the other TV networks.
It's a fabulous show. People should watch it. I want to go back to the book, especially to the part that I want everyone to hear who's listening. People don't want to hear about broadcast. They want to hear about intellectual disabilities and what you do with them. Your dad's afterwards has one line. There is no finish line. And, once you put your arms around that as a parent, as a brother, as a sister, as an aunt, as an uncle, as a friend to a kid who needs help, there is no finish line. Then you'll begin to realize it's just about the day ahead of you and helping the kid the day ahead of you. Do you think it's going to change attitudes towards kids who might be different in the classroom?
I don't know if it'll change attitudes. One of the things that was very important to my dad is that he never told anybody that I had autism. He said because he didn't think really anybody would care. He didn't want me to be sort of wrapped in bubble wrap. He said, I'm going to hold your hand through the adversity rather than take the adversity away, which he did. He was there every night at 4:20. He would put me back together every night from the humiliation and abuse that I took every day in school. And I didn't know this until I wrote the book. He would then walk downstairs from my bedroom when I went to sleep, and he would sit in the living room by himself and cry for hours. And my mother would come out and find him. So I don't know. This isn't a prescription or a cure, right? This is just my story. But I think what I hope it does is it says to parents, you can make an enormous difference in helping your kid be more and putting them back together and how important that is. My dad never let me have an extra minute on a test or not take a class because I had severe learning disabilities, or he never gave, I never got a pass in English because I couldn't spell or had these issues or anything like that. Never took medication. His idea was I have to teach you to adapt to the world. And that was his point. And he never wanted me to use it as an excuse later in life. And I hesitate always now when I tell this story publicly that I'll sort of start slipping back. Oh, well, I can be a little less disciplined about how I treat people or how I work every day to focus on people and to put into action the lessons that my dad taught me. Because people now know that I have this issue, they'll be more understanding. And the truth of the matter is people may be understanding outwardly. I don't think people are really ever understanding inwardly. Like the world is the world. And the idea that the world is going to adapt for you is just hogwash. Maybe it should, but it's not. And that's the world we live in. And that's what my dad and the story of Born Lucky is trying to adapt me to.
Well, I'll add an addendum to that. It will encourage parents, but it's also going to encourage kind people to continue to be kind because people don't forget kindness. Born Lucky is the demonstration of that. And you did it methodically. You never said you were doing it. You just told stories about people who weren't, I can't use some words on an FCC affiliate, who weren't that way. And there were sure a lot of jerks in your life, but there were also a fair sampling of small saints. I'll use a small s saints, and maybe some giant saints, your mom and your dad certainly. And Charlie Brennan, go practice your craft. I want to close there. Michael Kelly, before he was killed in Iraq, told me never mistake journalism for a professionalism. It's a craft and you have to practice it. So woven in this book is simply do the work. Just do the work again and live next to your phone, show up first, get the assignment desk to love you, and it'll work. Leland, last question. Has Medill asked you to come back yet to talk about this?
No. They have not. I don't expect them to. They sort of blackballed me after I started working for Fox. The Medill Hall of Fame had all these journalists that have certainly been successful. You could argue that I'm by any reasonable measure would be part of that. And They have not. And look, that's fine, Hugh. This book is not about my success. And Born Lucky is just a way of my story that hopefully by putting it out there and being vulnerable and explaining, I think, as you said, really rawly, the hell that I went through will give other parents, families, kids hope. Every parent of a kid who's having a hard time, the hope that it gets better and what it means to show up and to put your kid back together every day. Is so important and I think so underrated by the experts. And look, there's a reason now Born Lucky has sold out on Amazon twice, and we're having to print 20,000 more copies and 15,000 more copies after that, because people are hungry for this story. Because nobody's
It's never going to go out of print,
Nobody's...
Leland. It's never going to go out of print. And I interview a lot of people and I read a lot of books. Ron Fournier hit me with Love That Boy, and you hit me hard with Born Lucky, and I think a lot of parents and a lot of kids are going to benefit from this. Congratulations on it. I took you 32 minutes. I said 30, but I appreciate the time. Born Lucky. You might have to wait a week because they've sold out at Amazon, but go get it. Born Lucky by Leland Vittert. See him on News Nation tonight. Thank you, Leland.
Thank you, Hugh.